What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Highlanders Workshop. Today we're here to talk strategy again, as opposed to our deck spotlight series where we talk about the cards that do or don't go into your deck. Today I want to talk about 3 in-game methods that you can use to improve your overall win percentage. This is a video that is more so directed at the newer to intermediate players, but I think even the more experienced players could use a refreshment every now and again on some of these concepts. So, without further ado, 3 in-game methods to improve your win percentage and catch that elusive dub. Method number 1, politics. The fun of EDH as a format is largely due to the fact that it is a multiplayer, free-for-all format. This adds a ton of excitement to the dynamic of the game, but it also presents complex strategic scenarios that one must navigate throughout the game. And unless you play in a meta where table talk is banned or highly frowned upon, you can use more than just the cards in your deck to navigate these scenarios. Within a free-for-all game where you have multiple enemies, temporary alliances can still be formed and situational agreements can be arrived at. Recognizing the opportunity to negotiate with your opponents in lieu of taking direct action against them can provide you with a very tangible advantage, as you often do not have to expend any actual in-game resources to come to these types of agreements. So in effect, it's like adding a free spell to your deck. Some simple examples of this are the classic, "You don't attack me, I won't attack you" agreement. This is a very basic, usually one-round agreement where 2 players basically just agree to attack a common enemy and offer each other a temporary ceasefire as a vote of confidence to go on the offensive. A slightly more controversial version of this is the whole, "Hey, I can kill player A if you, players B and C, agree to give me 1 turn of no crackbacks." This is typically a situation that people only find acceptable if player A has really become the archenemy, and players B and C will be more likely to make this kind of agreement. But it can be a bit salt-inducing if you're player A especially. Another example of politicking to draw out your resources is something I like to call multiplying your removal. Now, what this means essentially is that you present a removal spell that you are presumably about to put on the stack, and offering to spare a potential target of that removal spell in exchange for some kind of amnesty or negotiation in regards to it, and then targeting something else instead, which kind of just gives you 2-for-1 value on that card. For example, let's say you're holding a disenchant, destroy target artifact or enchantment. On the battlefield, player A has an Ashnod's Altar, and player B has a Warstorm Surge. Now, you recognize that Ashnod's Altar is a potentially game-winning combo piece, and so of course, you're afraid of that. However, you also have somewhat of a low life total, so even the Warstorm Surge presents somewhat of an existential threat to you. How do you decide what to destroy? Well, you can use politics to multiply your removal spell by presenting your disenchant, and then turning to player B with their Warstorm Surge and saying, "Hey, I would really like to get rid of that Ashnod's Altar because I think player A is about to combo off with it pretty soon. But I'm also terrified of your Warstorm Surge. As you can see, my life total is getting kind of low, and I know you run lots of large creatures in that deck, so something needs to be done about that." And then you make the offer. "Hey, I'll destroy the altar instead of the Surge if you, the Surge controller, say give me 3 turns off from any Warstorm Surge damage. Or say you can direct your Warstorm Surge damage at my creatures, but not at my face, and if you agree to that, I'll destroy the altar instead of your Warstorm Surge." Something like that. Obviously, every player is going to have slightly different thresholds when it comes to politicking, so you kind of just have to feel out your opponents and see what kind of agreements they're willing to make. Some players feel like anything beyond a 1-turn agreement is too much to make. Some people will give you game-long amnesty from something in order to hang on to it. It's just kind of all about your play group and the individuals within it and what they're willing to be okay with. And one more way of politicking without having to actually burn any cards to gain an advantage would be sounding the alarm. Now, the awareness and experience level of your opponents will often vary game to game, especially if you're playing at your LGS, where you might come across a variety of players, as opposed to playing in one small meta where maybe only a handful of players show up. So, given this potential gap in awareness and experience, if you see something, say something. There's no rule against saying, hey, player A has a combo piece on the board, or player B just drew more cards than the rest of us combined in the last 2 rounds. These are things that you are totally free to point out within the game to try to draw other players' attention to one specific player who might be about to become a problem. But beware, as this may easily incur the wrath of the player you were trying to rally the others against. But more often than not, if you are successful in convincing the others and recruiting them to your cause, the reward should outweigh the risk most of the time. And even if it doesn't, well, hey, then the player that you are trying to turn everyone against, crushing you in some kind of way, only really validates the point you were trying to make. And even if you lose or get totally wrecked in that specific situation, at least the other players at the table are going to see that and say, hey, Frank was right. He tried to tell us this guy was going to be a problem, and sure enough, he's a problem. Moving on to method number 2, bluffing. Perhaps slightly more controversial than politicking, depending on who you ask, is bluffing. Now, let me be clear. I am not advocating for lying. This harkens back to politics as well. If you tell an opponent you won't destroy their creature as part of a deal that you made with them, and you destroy it anyway, that's lying, not politics. I don't really believe that going back on a deal that you agreed to is a political strategy or a strategic move. It's just lying. Now, if you want to split hairs about the wording of the deal, let's go back to the Warstorm Surge example. Let's say you negotiated for no damage being dealt directly to you by the Warstorm Surge, but you neglected to mention anything about your creatures. Well, if the Warstorm Surge player continues to blast your creatures with the Surge, you might say, hey, wait a minute, I thought we had a deal, to which they would reply, we only had a deal about damage directly to you, you didn't say anything about your creatures, and so be careful when negotiating with people, because some people will take you down to the letter of the law. Anyway, back to bluffing. I don't agree with dishonesty, but if bluffing is done cleverly, then in my opinion, it's not dishonesty, it's deception, which is strategic. My favorite way to accomplish this is by using questions instead of statements, because a question can't be a lie. For example, player A enters combat with a terrifying creature ready to swing away, and you fear that you might be on the receiving end of that creature with no removal spell to save your bacon. You could bluff the removal by saying, hey, if you attack me, I'll kill your creature. But then if they call your bluff and you don't kill it, you've been exposed. Not only in that particular moment, but also in the broader sense that everyone at the table will now see that you can't be taken at your word. However, if player A enters combat and you simply ask, hey, before you declare attackers, where do you plan on swinging that? Now you've planted the seed of doubt in player A's head without making any kind of declarative statement that could be confirmed or debunked. After you ask this question, player A might get the hint, and unless you are the unquestioned target that they have in their sights at all costs, there's a good chance they may look elsewhere for fear of what you might have in store for their creature. Now, of course, this is a lot more effective if you are showing the mana or other resources available to be able to react, so try not to tap out all the way on your turn unless you absolutely have to, or you just don't have any intention of even trying to bluff at some point later in the round. Also, anytime you're playing blue, you have a similar luxury whenever anyone casts a spell, because they will look to you for permission, essentially, so you have the opportunity to bluff having counter magic in your hand. Again, by asking questions like, how much damage is that? What's in your graveyard? How many cards are in your hand? Basically, just something simple to insinuate that you might be doing some kind of cost-benefit analysis in your head about whether or not a spell should be countered. That way, when you don't cast the counterspell that you don't actually have, they might just assume that you deemed the spell not worth countering based on their answer and not because you don't have it. Finally, method number 3 is threat assessment and resource allocation. So whereas the first 2 categories pertain to gaining advantages beyond the cards available to you, this is all about how to use what you do have at your disposal. Until you assemble your infinite combo, your resources for staying alive and securing the win in a game of Commander are finite. You can use politics and the occasional bluff to stretch these resources a bit further, but when push comes to shove and a crucial decision is required on your part, you need to be ready to make the hard choices. This can be immensely difficult, especially for newer players, because there are just so many pieces of information as well as a tremendous amount of speculation that factor into what the optimal decision may be. And note that I used the word optimal, not correct or right, because oftentimes there just is not enough information available to make a definitively correct decision. Think about playing a hand of blackjack. For those of you who don't know the rules of blackjack, simply put, the goal is to get as close to the number 21 with the cards in your hand without going over 21, and you are always playing against the dealer. So in our blackjack example, let's say your opening hand adds up to 15. Now, the optimal decision for you in a vacuum is to stay with 15, because the odds say that you are more likely to draw a card that busts you, or puts your total over 21, than to draw a card that helps you, since the most likely value to draw is 10, because not only is 10 worth 10 in blackjack, but all of the face cards in a deck are worth 10 as well, making it the most common number among the numbers that you can draw. And in this case, with a 15, even any card 7 or higher still busts you. But if the dealer is showing a 9, by the same principle, you know that the most likely card that the dealer can pair with their 9 is a 10, and that will give them a 19, which beats your 15. In this case, you may elect to take another card. Actually, the odds dictate that you should here, even though the most likely outcome is that whatever the next card is will bust you. In other words, don't be Han Solo. You should always be considering the odds, and thinking in terms of percentages and likelihoods will improve your ability to successfully navigate situations where knowing what's correct or incorrect is practically impossible. Let's take this from the casino back to Magic, and let's get really specific here to show how complex these situations can get. Let's say it's turn 5. Player A casts a Rhystic Study, a card that is very annoying and very effective for sure, but doesn't outright win the game or kill anyone by itself. You are playing a black and blue deck, and you have one counterspell in hand, and you know there's only one card in your deck that can actually remove enchantments from the battlefield. Because of this, you may feel compelled to counter the study, since the odds of you being able to get rid of it once it resolves are slim. But you can't forget to look around the table. In a 4-player game, there are 2 other players available aside from you that could potentially deal with any given opponent's threat. Let's say, in this example, player B is on a mono green deck, and player C has both green and white in their deck, the 2 colors that are by far the best at removing enchantments. You know they aren't going to be thrilled about the Rhystic Study being in play either, and as you look around the battlefield, you see that there aren't really any other problematic enchantments or artifacts out there at the moment, which means that once the study resolves, it's likely going to be target numero uno. In addition, turn 5 is solidly into the middle game, where threats are going to become more problematic, and attempts might soon be made to win the game outright, which makes that lone counterspell in your hand all the more valuable. In light of this, you choose to hold up your counterspell and let the study resolve. Did you make the correct decision? Well, only time will tell. If player A draws 8 cards with the Rhystic Study and combos off 2 turns later with their own counter magic to stop yours, you will probably feel like you didn't make the right decision. But if player B naturalizes the study immediately and then tries to Crater Hoof for the win in a turn or 2, well, guess who's going to be pretty happy they held on to that counter magic. Again, hindsight is 20/20, and you will rarely know whether you've made the right decision until well after it has to be made. So the best thing you can do is think big picture and use all of the information available to you when having to make the tough choices. Remember, you can lose the battle, but still win the war. Not every situation that's good or bad is going to be life or death in a game of Commander. And you'll be surprised at how often your opponents will just come through and save you inadvertently while they're just trying to do something good for themselves, and in the process save you not only from losing the game, but having to burn resources that you can instead bank for the truly crucial situations that could arise later in the game. Anyway, I hope this food for thought was helpful for all you Commander players out there, especially, like I said, the newer to intermediate players. Try incorporating these concepts into your strategy and see if you can use them to chase the dub. I'm your host, Frank. Thanks for joining me at the workshop, and be sure to like and subscribe to support my growing channel. It helps a lot. And if you have some cool politicking or strategic tidbits that I left out here, you have any questions about anything I discussed, whatever this video makes you think about, please let me know in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and I will catch you next time.